video, so.
Okay. All right.
What's this? Okay.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the WBC Talks. Stay home, stay safe. This is round number 14, and it's the historians, boxing historians. And we have people here that it's been around at the top level all the time. Let me first introduce 𝗧𝗔𝗟𝗡𝗗. 𝗧𝗔𝗟, how are you? You're on mute.
Sorry. Well, just to say hi to everybody. I'm very pleased to be here in this panel today. I'm very happy it's Monday and to start again all this panel. And I just want to share a little bit with you a small positive thinking reflection before all the great historians that are here and Mauricio start this great panel that we have. I just want to comment what is to train with adversity. If someone knows how to train with adversity are the boxers, because they prepare physically and mentally for a fight, and they face adversity during the match. So today we are facing a situation where we are dealing with adversity because we cannot control that. And I propose that whenever we feel we have an adverse situation, just to focus on the positive part of the situation. Accept what you are thinking, accept what you are feeling, and just that way you are going to be able to control the adversity. You have the possibility to react positive for the bad situation. It's nothing bad to feel bad. It's nothing bad to feel bad, but what we can do is to focus on the positive thinking. So I just wanted to share this small reflection before beginning this round. Thank you very much and have a great talk today.
Thank you, 𝗧𝗔𝗟𝗡𝗗.
Thank you.
Now, your microphone is mute. Now, let me introduce Mauricio Sulaiman, president of the WBC.
Okay, sorry.
Good.
Push something. I didn't know what was happening. I would like to, what 𝗧𝗔𝗟𝗡𝗗 just said is so powerful. When we had the panel with the doctors and then the panel with the mental health, I learned from the experts a few concepts that are very valuable. Every day we get anxiety. We watch news or we talk to someone or we have a bad situation happening, and that's happening to all of us, anxiety. And how I have learned to handle it is one, you can remain quiet and start breathing and think of that matter that creates anxiety and punch it. Give it a punch and you expel it out of your mind. Second, don't do the things that create anxiety. If watching news, if calling Don Majeski to hear how the world's gonna end,
Well, that will create anxiety for anyone.
stop doing it. Do the things that make you feel good. And if you get anxiety, just simply take it out of your mind. It's very simple to do it once you learn how to do it. And we have many short clips of guidance that we're going to be sending out through the WBC University. Thank you very much, 𝗧𝗔𝗟𝗡𝗗. And I'm so happy, thankful to Bill Kaplan, Don Majeski, and Bob Yellen to join us today in the WBC Talks. This is the historians I cannot wait to hear you speak, to share knowledge and anecdotes and information. And I'm just, I think we should just get started. It's going to be sensational. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mauricio. And I want to introduce 𝗪𝗪𝗧𝗪, one of the leading agents in boxing, great historian, and also a matchmaker. And he's been around since how long?
Cain and Abel, yeah.
That's 𝗪𝗪𝗧𝗪. Don, how are you?
That's Peter Cain and Abel Sanchez, actually. So it's a pleasure with you guys, people I respect as much as anybody I've ever known. So it's a privilege here, and let the ball start rolling. Whatever you need to ask or where the topics we go from, I'm ready to jump on.
That's great. Now, Bill Kaplan. He's a Hall of Famer publicist, and he has been working since 1952 with Joe
62. 62.
You say 50.
62. That's all right, Victor. You want to give me another 10 years? I'll take it.
Yeah. With Joe Louis, George Foreman, Oscar de la Hoya, Bob Arum, Don King, Kathy Duba, Eileen, and Don Charging. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you, Victor.
And now my brother, Bob Jalen, went, now he looks like my grandfather with that beard. Bob Jalen, head of boxing at ABC Sports and ESPN for over 20 years, chairman of ratings for committee for the WBC, president of MTK Global at this time, and historian, timekeeper, record keeper, and he's always calling, could you get me this information? Fighter. Bob, how are you?
Good. Thank you, Victor. And again, I apologize for all those people who know me, who are seeing this beard for the first time and are running for the hills. I'm sure we lost some audience once they've seen that. But the one thing I do want to say is, A, it's nice to be an esteemed company sharing this with Don and Bill. And B, I want to make sure that we all wish everybody, stay home, stay safe, stay with your family, and just stay strong. And we'll all get through this. So hope you enjoy the next, bunch of comments from the four of us, and just enjoy.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Bob.
And we have a little video that we want to share with you. Please roll the video. Well, so good to have you here, and I would like to hear how boxing started, the history of boxing, the shortest version you have.
Don, why don't you chime in first?
Well, it goes way back to the 17th century. It came out of boxing and British fairs and things like that. I mean, if you really want to go back, we go back almost to Egyptian times, to Babylonian times, to pre-Christian times. It's been part and parcel of human existence, expressing. I don't know if it started out as just two people having a fight, and then you had three people, the third person wanted to watch it. But we started out in the bare knuckle eras, went to the cestus eras, and I guess when you get up to the what do you call modern, well, not so much modern boxing, but boxing as we know it started in England. London prize ring rules in about the 18th century with James Figg and others of that era. late
Right.
17th century, starting in boxing booths, and people would watch it. You know, it grew along with leisure time, activities for people to do when they weren't working. And that grew through the Broughton's rules that started what we know about the knockout and rounds. They would go up to scratch in a field, or they would draw a line and they'd come up to the line, and certain expressions like throw your hats in the ring and things like that derived out of boxing. And that went along for, you know, close to 100 years, I guess. And then in about 1857, they started the Marquess of Queensberry as an amateur tournament at Cambridge University. And it began with that. And then that slowly evolved where professional boxing ran along simultaneously with bare knuckle boxing and glove boxing. But gloves in those days, you have to remember, may have been 2 ounces, just a mere covering for the hands. And more or less professional boxing, as we know today, began in the 1880s. There was a fellow named William Goldberg, started the Pelican Club in England. It was the first time that a fixed position could legally run professional boxing. That was about 1887. And they also sponsored bare knuckle boxing. There was a big scandal in Belgium with a fight. After that, the breakup of that basically ended bare knuckle boxing there. 1892 was the beginning of the Sullivan-Corbett, the first fight to a finish to determine the Marquess of Queensberry champion. And we sort of swept up from there. Then New York legalized boxing 1896, and that was the Horton Law. Then it was withdrawn in 1901. They brought in the Lewis Law, then the Frawley Law, which did not allow contests to be given a decision. They called it newspaper decision or popular verdict decisions. And in 1920, really the rules that came about that we evolved from today, the Walker Law started it, and then the NBA was created, which evolved into the WBA in 1921. And then the British Boxing Board of Control, as we know it, was constituted in 1929. And we sort of took off from there. So that's a brief, quick history of professional boxing.
Anything to add?
I was
Just
about to say all those things, but Don, you covered it for me.
I made it up as I go along. You know, I said a boxing historian is an old guy with a good memory who writes things down. That's about it.
The only thing I tossed in was, Don, was about 1909 National Sporting Club.
Yeah, that's right.
Standardized the weights.
100%, yes.
And as Don said, we took off from there.
Yeah. Great Britain really was the birthplace of the professional boxing as we know it. You know, that's where it evolved, and then everybody else. And it started the Anglo-American world, I suppose, where you had the earliest boxing. Great Britain, Australia, South Africa, the United States, Canada, and the rest of the world started to pick it up from there.
How about ratings? How were the ratings? How did they came about?
As far as I remember, gentlemen, Nat Fleischer, after he started the Ring magazine, looked at how some other sports were handling their classifications of teams, everything else, and he decided that he was going to start the Ring magazine ratings. Down in 1926, maybe a little.
Yeah, a little 26, 27, and it was done on first on an annual basis, then every 3 months, and then they started doing it every month after that. He picked up the idea from Walter Camp, who had the college football ratings. And other organizations, other people, other magazines would do ratings, but nobody really had a bona fide on it. So the Ring started, they were the first one to have any credibility, and people started following that. Although, as you know, they're always subjective, always open to criticism, no matter who is doing the ratings or where they're doing the ratings.
All right.
So what about, the one thing I'm always interested in is, like, I've always got, I don't want to jump ahead too much or, get off subject too much, but I'm sure we all have our favorite boxers and our all-time ratings.
Mm.
Why don't we throw out a bunch of, let's each go one at a time, Don, you name one, Bill, you name one, I'll name one. Our all-time favorite fighters, or all-time best fighters.
Right. Well, favorite and greatest are two different things.
I know that's. Yeah.
I like this fight. I don't think it's the best, but I sure loved watching him, like a Saad Muhammad or Arturo Gatti or Joe Frazier. They may not have been the best in their division, but boy, they were always value for money. You never had a bad night out with those guys.
Right. Let's go for a top dozen best fighters of all time.
Okay, who's going to start? Yeah,
You.
me.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, this again, everything's subjective, and then you have to justify or rationalize why. All right, I've got Robinson, Sugar Ray Robinson. I think that's almost universally accepted as the number one. It's always in these things I ask who's the second best, and I include heavyweights. And I like to use the phrase greatest rather than pound for pound because that sort of detracts from heavyweights because they figure, well, they only fought in one division, or a great fight like Willie Pep or Jimmy Wild were only great in one division, but they were so dominant that they should be included in any list. So for my
And that, by the way, that's what Don. I don't know what you and Bill, what you feel. I'm never one to compare boxers of different eras. For me, it's your dominance in your era and against those fighters of your era. Because listen, mankind has evolved. We're so much bigger and different athletes than we were 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. So that's how I tend to look at my list.
Yes, you can't say this guy, Jack Johnson how would he have done with the Joe Frazier? How would Muhammad Ali have done with Joe? They never fought, but how dominant, as you say, Bob, in their era, what great fighters did they beat of their time? Did they fight the best and did they beat the best? That's the way. So for me, I've got Sugar Ray Robinson, number one, Muhammad Ali, number two, Joe Louis, number three, Jack Johnson, number four, Sam Langford, number five, Harry Greb, number six, Roberto Duran, Henry Armstrong, number seven, Roberto Duran, number eight, Benny Leonard, number nine, Sugar Ray Leonard, number 10, and number 11 is Joe Gans, and number 12 is a fighter very few people talk about, and I'll get into him later, Packy McFarland. We just discovered where there was a fight, it was attributed he had lost in his first professional bout, but now, looking up the evidence, it was another fighter, McFarland, wasn't him. So that is the fact. He has had a record of 106 wins and no losses with 6 draws. So he has the greatest winning streak in the history of boxing without ever suffering a loss. And he beat the greatest fighters of his time. He never won a world championship because he never had the opportunity, but he beat Freddie Welch and Jack Britton and every top contender of his generation. So that's my top 12 with guys like Wild and Willie Pep and Jack Dempsey also to be, considered.
So you tend to lean heavily towards, you like the heavies.
I like heavyweights because, again, that's the ultimate division. Unfortunately, God born a heavyweight has had a chance to fight the lighter weights. But, Lewis and Ali and Johnson in those divisions were so dominant, the others. And Langford was such a phenomenal. I rate him as the greatest light heavyweight. But he beat 11 Hall of Famers from Joe Gans all the way up to Harry Wills. Harry Wills was 6'5". Joe Gans was a lightweight. So this guy ran through every single division, fought for over 20 years. Absolutely incredible. He had a lot of losses, but he always fought under adverse conditions. The guy would pick up his hat and coat and go out and fight on a 1 day's notice and fight the best fighters in the world. But again, it's always subjective.
Sure.
What's your opinion, Bob?
I'll throw in a couple guys.
Can you repeat just so we can? It's Ray Robinson.
Robinson, number one. And again, this is the greatest, not pound. Robinson, number one for me. Muhammad Ali, number two. Joe Louis, number three. Jack Johnson, number four. Sam Langford, number five.
Hold on. Langford.
5. 6, Harry Greb. 7, Henry Armstrong.
Yes.
8, Roberto Duran. 9, Benny Leonard. 10,
Benny Leonard.
Benny Leonard, lightweight.
You said Sugar Ray Leonard.
10 is Sugar Ray Leonard. I have Sugar Ray behind Benny Leonard. Okay, Benny Leonard first, Sugar Ray Leonard. I got 2 Leonards in there.
Oh, Benny Leonard and Sugar Ray Leonard.
That's correct. And then 11, Joe Gans. And then 12, I'm sort of tied. But in 12, I would go with Packy McFarland or Willie Pep. And then, there's Ezra Charles to consider and Jack Dempsey to consider. But I picked Packy McFarland. 106 wins and no losses. You got to consider a guy against the best fighters of his generation, not a built-up record yet.
Okay. So who's next?
Thank you, Don. Bill, could you tell us your list?
I do have a list, but you know what, Victor? You said top 10, and I couldn't stop at 10. My list is longer than that. But I agree with Don Majeski that Sugar Ray Robinson is my number one. And then I have to go to my bias and talk about my 2 favorite fighters of all time. My 2 favorite fighters of all time are
Foreman and De La Hoya.
That's right. That's right. It's obvious. It's obvious. And I'll tell you why. Not only because I've known them so long and I love them, but those 2 men have given more money and more attention to interests and charities and hospitals and scholarships and so on than any athlete I'm aware of. I mean, Oscar just gave $250,000 to a hospital that he's been supporting with millions of dollars for years. George Foreman, the same thing, when he was making all that money on the grill, and he wound up grossing before taxes over $250 million. He gave millions. And because I love those guys so much, again, it's biased, but I put them at the top of my list. And then, I mean, of course, it's mostly guys that I've worked with. I didn't work with Henry Armstrong, but he certainly belongs high on the list. Joe Louis was my boyhood hero. My father, who immigrated from Lithuania in 1908 to Des Moines, Iowa, the only sport he was interested in was boxing. So I bonded with my father sitting on the living room floor and listening to Joe Louis fights. Joe Louis was heavyweight champion for 11 and a half years, uninterrupted. And that's why I pick him as my #1 heavyweight of all time, and Ali #2. Larry Holmes #3. I forget who's #4, but I have George Foreman #5. And my excuse is that Teddy Brenner, the matchmaker of the Madison Square Garden in the salad days of the Garden, he had George Foreman #5. So I thought to myself, hey, if Teddy has him #5, then I can have him #5, and so on. But some of the other fighters that are so great, Lennox Lewis was a great heavyweight. Of course, Evander Holyfield, the great fighters. And it's amazing that if I was to personally pick the greatest fighter of all time, which I've done along with Don Majeski, who is a true historian, then Sugar Ray Leonard. I think Sugar Ray Leonard is the best all-around fighter. The two Sugar Rays meet each other, and it's Robinson and then Leonard to this day, as far as being a skilled all-around great fighter. I mean, I've got so many guys on this list. By the way, I want to tell you when I met Don Majeski. Don, when you were a teenager, you used to fly out to the Olympic Auditorium to see fights.
Right.
How old were you when you first flew out?
Well, the first time I date my beginnings in boxing, I used to work for we used to have a program called Tonight's Boxing Program. There's a fellow named Malcolm Flash Gordon, a diminutive guy, 4'11", boxing genius. You know, just had the inherent knowledge, and Johnny Bosdale and Bruce Trampler. And we would write this program, not Bruce, he was in college, but we'd write this program. He had an offset machine in his studio apartment. We'd print out 400 or 500 copies, sell them for 35 cents a piece outside of Madison Square Garden and all the venues around New York City, North Bergen Hall and Newark. And we'd go traveling around Philadelphia with Russell Peltz, where he's just starting. And we'd get 15 cents for every one we sold. And you'd sell 300, have 30 bucks. There was enough money left from that 30 to buy a ticket to the fight, get a sandwich and a Coke. Nobody drank in those days. And see the fights. It was wonderful. So on a vacation, we went out to California. He wrote a letter to George Parnassus, which I won't go into at length at this point, but got me in to see the Oliveira-Lana Rose fight. And we devoted 22 pages of the next publication to me raving about the greatest event in the history of mankind since the creation. And then when I back to California in February, George Parnassus put me right at ringside for Annapolis Lopez, and I've been in ever since. So I'm 16 years of age probably when you first met me.
Right.
Yeah.
I worked on those fights for Parnassus.
Oh,
But
yeah.
also when you first visited the Olympic Auditorium, you must have been in your teens. I was working at the Olympic, and I said to my dear beloved friend Don Chargan, "Who's that kid?" And he says, "Oh, that's Don Majeski. He's from the East Coast, and he's a learned fight aficionado and a historian." And you were a teenager. Can you tell me how old you were when you first came to the Olympic?
Yeah, about 16, about the same time, because I met Jackie McCoy. Of course, Mondo Ramos had just won the title. We did a story on him, and Jackie was a great. I'll tell you one thing. Starting out, and I know it was for you, Bill and Bob and Mauricio, everybody was so encouraging because we were in an era where boxing nobody was going into boxing in the 60s or 70s. You know, they went in the 40s. Boxing stopped on national TV in America in 64, and everybody got jobs. They were working. Jackie always worked as a stevedore, I think. You know,
That's right.
there were
That's
very
right.
few well,
And Jackie developed 5 world champions himself, trained and managed 5 world champions.
a great
Mhm.
opening that he's not in the International Boxing Hall of Fame, but hopefully that'll be made up in the coming year. Having
Well,
said
that's up to you, Don. You're on the committee.
well, look, but everybody encouraged, like from Nat Fleischer and Dan Daniel and Parnas, and these people are not 10 or 20 years my senior. They were 50 years, but they were
Right.
so great. You know, they saw some young people and said, hey, we want to help you. You know, there was no jealousy. There was no competition. The 17, 18-year-old kid is not going to be competition to George Parnassus. So I'll have to say those people as mentors. And I wasn't thinking of the business in those days. Just wanted to write for magazines. So, but boy, they were great. And it was such an era of fantastic people who were left over from the 1920s even. So what knowledge, again, but the terrible thing is, if I knew, you know, then what I know now, it's so much more I could have learned from those people, just to tap them with the stories, talking about anecdotes. God, they knew everything and saw everything. So it was a wonderful, wonderful time. And there were Kuko Kandi was another, but just great. And, you know, Mauricio's father, needless to say, but phenomenal group of individuals that really, really helped me out.
That's right.
Yeah.
And Bob Yalen, I first met Bob when he was the man at ESPN. I mean, I knew him as the matchmaker. When ESPN had the fights, everything would go through Bob. Now, Mauricio Sulaiman, my only president. I first met Mauricio when he was 8 or 9 years old, and his father, God bless him, said, Bill, my son Mauricio and my son Fernando Ferdi are coming to the Los Angeles area to go to a baseball camp, an overnight, you know, I don't know, Mauricio might have been 2 weeks, a baseball camp. Will you take him to the baseball camp? And I said, of course I will. So I did, but the day before they were supposed to report to the camp, I took him to a place called Disneyland. And I had the privilege of taking Jose's 2 sons, Mauricio and Ferdi, to Disney. We spent the day there, and I think they had a good time. And then I dropped them off at the baseball camp. So
to go with Uncle Bill to Disneyland is the best thing that can happen to you. You eat all day, munchies, peanuts and apple and turkey leg, and just the most splendid person I have been with.
Thank you, Mauricio. Anyway, I'm going to go through names real fast. So Joe Louis, Jose Napoles, Muhammad Ali, Lennox Lewis, Danny Jacobs. How could you not admire Danny Jacobs? Riddick Bowe, Evander Holyfield, Joe Frazier. Then we got the Sugar Rays, Sugar Ray Robinson, Sugar Ray Leonard, Roberto Duran, my choice for the greatest lightweight champion of all time, Manny Pacquiao, Tommy Hearns, Riddick Bowe. If Riddick Bowe would have worked as hard training as he did for the first Holyfield fight, everybody would say he's a top 10 all-time great heavyweight. Unfortunately, that first of 3 Holyfield fights was the only one that he worked hard on. And I got to mention Jesus Pimentel, Bobby Chacon, Ruben Oliveras, Canelo Alvarez. I won't get a paycheck if I don't mention Canelo. Chavez Sr., Jorge Arce was so much fun. He won titles, I believe, in 4 divisions, but he was so fun to work with. Even though we had a language barrier, he and Ruben Oliveras were guys that somehow I could communicate with. Butterbean. Now, Butterbean, the king of the 4-rounders. That was fun. It was novel. And the thing that I loved the most was he was even fatter than me. One time he's fighting a fight out in the desert, and it was a WBC fight. And I know that I can't even remember who the main event was. It was a WBC fight, and my dear friend Jose Sulaiman was at ringside, and I was hovering near him. And Butterbean fought his fight, and he fought a guy called the Facelifter. the guy had muscles on top of muscles on top of muscles. And Butterbean comes out, hits him with an overhand right, and the guy goes down, but not only to go down, he folded on the way down like a folding chair. And I'll never forget, Jose said, Butterbean can punch. And I said, yeah, he can punch. I know he's the king of the 4-rounders. He's a novelty act, but he can punch. All right, more names. The new kids, Ryan Garcia and Victor Ortiz Jr. I hope they continue on the path that they're on and become superstars. Lights Out James Toney was a great fighter. Danny Lopez, Little Red, was a great fighter. Paul Gonzalez was the first guy from East LA to win a gold medal in the LA Olympics, 84 Olympics. Brian Valoria, such a nice kid and could fight. Dimitri Salita is never got a title. At one time he was number one. He was number one welterweight contender, and he went over to England and fought. Help me out, Don. Who did he fight? Who was the champion?
Boy, Bob would know better than I.
The Pakistani, who was
Amir Khan.
Amir Khan.
That's right. He fought him. He got knocked out Dimitri got knocked out in the first round, but he's a promoter now, and he's my surrogate grandson. And Triple G, Bernard Hopkins. I mean, two of the all-time. Okay. I have more names, but I'll stop.
You're cheating. Let me just. Robinson, number one.
Yes.
Then you said Ali or Foreman as number two.
I think he had Foreman 5, right, or something like that.
Yeah, well, that's in the heavyweights.
Mm-hmm.
That's in the heavyweights.
The all time. You said then Robinson 1, Ali 2. Then who will be number 3?
I'm putting in Foreman and I'm putting in Foreman and the Golden Boy because of their great hearts and their generosity, and they could fight.
But we're not going to your favorite fighter. We're going to the best of all time.
I understand.
Okay.
Well, you have to put Henry Armstrong up there.
Okay.
Henry Armstrong held the. Don will correct me, but Henry Armstrong held the featherweight, the lightweight, and the welterweight title simultaneously, and he fought for the middleweight title. And Don, what's the name of the guy who fought for the middleweight title?
Seferino Garcia.
Seferino Garcia, and they called it a draw, and everybody said, "Hey, that was no draw. That Henry Armstrong won that fight." I mean, you got to put him high up on your list. I was able to talk to Henry Armstrong when I was a young man, and he was a preacher, and he told me a story about when he was going up in weight, they would get fisherman's weights, you know, those lead weights that you use when you fish. They would get fisherman's weight. They would paste pubic hair on them, and then they would put them up in his groin so he would weigh more. I mean, they actually weighted him. And I got that straight from Henry Armstrong, and there was no reason for Henry to lie. Anyway, I'm done talking. I'll talk later.
Bill, but I still don't have the 10. I have Robinson 1, Ali 2, Foreman 3, De La Hoya 4, Armstrong 5, Joe Louis 6. Who would be 7?
I don't know. I didn't rate him. That's as far as I went.
Okay.
You can take 7, 8, 9, and 10 out of the 30 names that I just said real fast.
I will. Bob, top 10.
Well, we've hit most of the names already, so I'm not gonna go over this. Over a bunch of names.
How you have them? Yeah.
Yep, but I'm gonna few other names to consider. You know, we've gotten away. There's no real Latin American bend here. What about guys? Carlos Monzon, Eder Joffre, you know, Alexis Arguello,
Julio Cesar Chavez.
Julio Cesar Chavez, all great fighters that we haven't touched on. But one, for this era, there's one that none of us have mentioned at all. Where would everybody rate Floyd Mayweather?
That's amazing that nobody mentioned him. I don't know if that's telling on us or
Because
on...
we don't like him.
Exactly.
No, one of the greatest defensive fighters I've ever seen. Capital letters, boldface, underline defensive. One of the greatest defensive fighters of all time.
Yeah.
But not many people appreciate defensive fighters.
No, Pernell Whitaker never really has gotten his due, but Pernell, you couldn't touch Pernell. Guys like Marlon Starling, who may not be an all-time great, but defensively just fabulous.
There's a video where Oscar de la Hoya is trying to punch Pernell, and he throws like 8 to 10 punches, and finally he stops and starts laughing. De la Hoya started laughing because he couldn't even touch him.
But he won the fight.
I know.
But in their prime, they were untouchable. Guys like Don, you touch up it. Willie Pep in his prime,
Yes.
was basically untouchable.
He won 60-odd fights in a row. Yeah, Nicolino Loche is another fighter. Although with Loche, I have a problem because he can't, almost every time he fought outside of Argentina, he lost. He had a style that was unique, and if a judge didn't appreciate that style, they wouldn't credit him with, you don't credit defense as much as offense. I mean, one of the great overlooked fighters, he's a Hall of Famer, but people never talk of him among the greats. Maxie Rosenblum. He had 299 fights, won over 200 fights. I think he got stopped twice in his career and fought everybody. I mean, the heavyweights, middleweights. He fought Mickey Walker and Harry Greb. But because of his style, they call him Slapsy Maxie.
Slapsy Maxie.
Hit you with an open hand. But boy, this guy was a great fighter. So the defensive fighter does not get the credit.
That's
we call
right.
it boxing, but really what the public pays to see is fighting.
That's right.
They go to the fights. They don't go to boxing. They go to the fights. So
I'll tell you how I met Slapsy Maxie.
Okay.
Guys. I was in Vegas, and with my brother-in-law, who was my mentor. He was married to my oldest sister, Larry Rummins. He was 25 years older than me. And he introduced me to Slapsy Maxie, and Slapsy Maxie sold me a necktie. That's what he did. He sold. So I think I still have that necktie from about 50 or 60 years ago, but Slapsy Maxie was, you're right, another great name. There are so many. And have I said Bernard Hopkins yet?
Yes, you did.
Okay. Bernard, I'll tell you about Bernard Hopkins. When he was a fighter, I didn't like him personally, not at all. I mean, didn't like him. I won't go into the reasons why, but I'll tell you, I did not like Bernard Hopkins. At the end of his career, and now I love Bernard Hopkins. I mean, I admire him. I love him. I appreciate his skills. I appreciate the fact that he's kept every dollar he ever earned. He's taken care of his money, and he always walks around in condition. You see him, he always looks like he's ready to jump into the ring. So I love him and I admire him.
Yeah,
Do you mean he never invited you for lunch?
Yes, but he wanted him to pay for it. Yes, but he expected Bill to pay for it. That was the problem.
I did a couple of times.
Well, you did, but he never would. Another guy who had an epiphany, and you would know, both of you, Bob, and you've been exposed to them early in their careers, and Bill more than others. George Foreman. I remember when Foreman turned pro because he came to New York, the first fight, Don Waldheim on the Frazier Quarry card in June '69.
Right.
And his mentor, well, he was trained by Dick Sauer. His mentor was Sonny Liston. They would spar. He was up in Oakland, and Liston would, and he sort of adopted the personality. It was this surly guy, and had a guy named Leroy. What was his name? Leroy Green or Leroy Jones around him, and
Leroy Jones.
Jones, right? And a big heavy guy, and he was a surly guy, very tough. When he fought Jimmy Young and lost that fight, he had this epiphany. And on the comeback, he was the most beloved figure. He's like a secular saint. What a change in personality. But boy, has it served him well,
That's right.
Yeah. He got the chip off his shoulder and moved on. And really, he's become a phenomenal.
But he got that surliness from Liston because he won the gold. By the way, I actually started with George in 1967, a year before he went to the Olympics.
Okay.
He lost his first amateur fight I think he was like 7-0 with 7 knockouts, and and it was a fight in Oakland, and I met him on that night. I was the ring announcer and the publicist for the fight at the Oakland Municipal Auditorium. So George was outboxed by a guy who had been an international, competed in international amateur tournaments. And George won the first round. And at the end of the first round, he was out of gas, and the guy boxed his ears off in round 2 and 3. And it was an easy decision, and George lost. Well, I had to tell the crowd that after watching one amateur fight, that the professional card would follow in 25 minutes, and I was roundly booed. And because in California at that time, you had to separate amateurs and professionals. I walked back to the dressing room, and here's this 18-year-old kid sitting on the rubbing table and in the dressing room all by himself, with literally his chin on his chest. And I walked up to him and I said, George, and I kind of slapped him on the shoulder. I says, don't worry about it, George, you're going to be a great fighter someday. Never knowing what he would become. And in his autobiography by George, which was a New York Times bestseller, LA Times bestseller, very well-written book. He had a ghostwriter, of course. And in the book, he said there was this guy named Bill Kaplan, who I'll talk about more about later in the book. He says, and he says, I lost the fight, and that was it. I was going to quit boxing, no more boxing. He says, and he slapped me on the shoulder and said, don't worry about it, George, you're going to be a great fighter someday. So I decided that I wouldn't quit boxing. So look, there would be no George Foreman if it wasn't for me. I could somehow see it. I'm bullshitting now, okay? Everything up to this point was true. But I've known George Foreman. I took him to the Bob Hope show at NBC in Burbank when he won the gold medal in Mexico. And he's done 3 family weddings for me because he's an ordained minister. And those 3 times he was kind of a Christian minister / rabbi, but he's done 3. I just can't tell you how much I love George Foreman. And he's an all-time great. You mentioned Pernell Whitaker. Because I live in the LA area, 25 miles from downtown LA. I went to boxing at the '84 Olympics every day, and Pernell Whitaker was my choice as the best fighter on the American team. And Don, I don't know the number. The Americans won about 7 gold medals in boxing that tournament. But Pernell Whitaker was my pick as number 1. Okay, I'm done.
But your guy Paul Gonzalez got the Val Barker Award for Best Boxer.
That's right. That's right. And Don Chargan and I promoted Paul Gonzalez 1 year from it was called Gold Medal on CBS, and Don Chargan and I promoted that fight with 3 other gold medal winners. Yeah, Paul was the first athlete from East LA to win an Olympic gold.
What is he doing today, Bill? What's Paul Gonzalez doing today?
Selling cars.
Okay, all right, good.
And speaking of '84, that's when I was with ABC and Howard Cosell. I sat there for every single fight.
Wow.
Watched every single fight at the '84 Olympics. Remember that well. One of my favorites came out with Jeff Fennick.
Oh yeah, him a good fighter. I worked with him.
When he lost to Red Sapofsky, Cosell was going to go insane. Such a robbery.
I remember you, Bob, because you bought all those Fennick fights that nobody would take from Australia, and really gave him the opportunity to shine in this country, and gave him, exposure that he never would have had because you had the appreciation of how good a fighter he really was. Yeah. Guy was
and that's the great thing about boxing. Here it is, 36 years later. I still talk to Jeff every couple of weeks. Just check in, how's he doing, and still friends.
Great, yes, wonderful. What a great personality he is. Yeah.
Do you remember how Azuma Nelson got to see the world?
Tell us. Tell us. I remember Zuma, but tell us, Mauricio.
Well, Azuma Nelson was picked by Don King to fight Salvador Sanchez at the Madison Square Garden.
Mhm.
Oh,
And Don King
Notice,
told,
yeah.
and Don Sanchez, he had just beat, he became a big hero when he defeated Gomez.
Mhm, mhm.
So he had a couple of fights that year, and then it was 1982. Then Don King said, "You're gonna do a very easy title defense. It's a young guy from Ghana, only 13 fights. He's a young novice, so it's gonna be very easy. Take the fight, and then you can take your vacation."
Mhm.
And it was one of the most brutal
Yeah.
fights.
Square Garden, yeah.
I think he
Yeah.
was knocked out in the 15th round.
Yes.
Correct.
It was still 15 rounds.
Mhm.
And Gomez told Don King at the press conference, he said, please, next fight, make it very hard because I don't want these easy fights. Are very tough.
Mhm. Yeah, you know, we're talking about our top 20. I mean, that's what you put in the abstract. I never saw, obviously, Harry Greb and people like that. But if you say the best fight you ever saw in each division, personally, I like Azuma Nelson the best. And I'll tell you, he came in an era where you had Pedroza, you had Arguello, you had Sal Sanchez, and Azuma. Azuma took that fight on like 3 weeks' notice. I think it was Juan Laporte was supposed to fight Sanchez.
Correct.
He came in. He came from Ghana. Mickey Duff booked him in the fight. I remember it very well. And he was ahead on one card. And this is on 3 weeks' notice. And then he waited a long time after Sanchez died. The title was vacant. Juan Laporte won it. He lost it to Gomez. And Azuma went to Puerto Rico and beat Gomez. But he fought everybody. The best. He beat Fennec by knockout. He beat Gomez by knockout. I remember him beating Villasano at the Olympic. Packed house. Always fought under adverse circumstances. And to me, I think over the long run, he was better fighter than Sanchez. And he and Arguello would have been a dream match to watch. But he was the best featherweight I ever saw. And I think he stood up, fought in Britain. He went over and fought Jim McDonald and knocked him out. He fought Villasano in California and beat him. He fought Fennec in Australia.
Azabache Martinez.
Yes, as a
Mhm.
name it, he fought them. Then he went up, you know, a bit too much with Pernell Whitaker, got outboxed for the lightweight title. But to me, as a featherweight, he was the best I ever saw. And what a magnificent human being. One of the finest people you'll ever meet in your life. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And you see that when you get at the, you know, thinking of some of the great African fighters, since we're talking historians now,
Mhm.
what they turn, you look at guys like Dick Tiger
Mhm.
and his you know, the battles he went through,
Mhm.
and in a battle that he did for Biafra,
Mhm.
to free
Mhm.
Biafra.
Yeah.
I'll think of Hogan Bassi and you know the fighters of that era that went over to England to fight.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who's the
Yeah.
first champion from Africa?
Battling Siki.
Good.
Battling Siki, he's got it. That's 100%. Hey, we dug up Battling Siki, set him back there. His, you know, the headstone of Battling Siki is in the Flushing Cemetery. We talked about that the other day, and Louis Armstrong is buried there, but it's still there. So the gravestone is still there, but the body is no longer there. Yes, I guess it was too expensive to lift up this 400-pound gravestone and move it. But if you want to see the gravestone, the memorial, I guess, to Siki, you can go and see it in the Flushing Cemetery, not far from where I live. Yeah.
Don, is it true that the first thing that you bought in New York, it was your gravestone?
Well, no. What happened is years ago they were selling cemetery plots, and I remember all my life people saying, "I had to bury this one and that one." And Chris Dundee once told me a story. There's a famous manager named Al Weil, had Lou Ambers, but most famously Rocky Marciano.
that's right.
Right? He was a matchmaker, but everybody hated him.
He was a terrible man.
Terrible man and a notorious gambler. So he died broke. And Dundee would always brag, "I had to pay for his grave." I said, "Well, I'm not going to let anybody brag about that." Yes, for so $200 on St. Michael's Cemetery, by the way, where Emil Griffith is buried. I bought this grave. So I said, that was the first piece of real estate I ever bought. And it's paid for, no mortgage. So I'm ready for time to go.
Don, is it true? Is it true you said you were gonna piss on Don King's grave?
No, that's a complete lie, and I'll tell you the story. Don King and I, thanks to Mauricio's father, acted as referee for me and Don King for what, 40 years? Whatever, I worked for Don King early, and then I left there under cloud. That story's too long to tell at this point. But anyway, we've never gotten along. And so one time we had an argument, and he was on the phone. Connie O'Connor, it was the young lady who worked for him. Dana Jameson, and were fighting, and I said, "You know, you can tell Don King he can piss on my grave, because I knew I owned one. And so the guy said, John said he's going to piss on. I said, I never said that. And he would take exception. Why'd you say that? I said, why were you? I'm going to piss on you. Why would you say that? I said, Don, you're a rich man. You get the best health care in the world. You don't have to worry about paying a bill. I've got anxiety every single day. It's much more likely that no matter how much older you are than I am, you're likely to outlive me and piss on my grave. So I wasn't going to say that. So it was a self-deprecating situation.
I'm glad we finally got the record straight.
I never said,
Yeah.
and he may live to do that, I'll say. He wants to spend the time and transportation to get up here. Find it. I'll tell you a quick George Foreman story. Now that Bill told one. And this is how my judgment is. So we were at a fight, Lennox Lewis and Phil Jackson, Atlantic City, and George was doing the commentary. He had just come off the loss to Tommy Morrison. And Bill Kozerski is a great friend of mine. He was handling Michael Moore as a promoter from Detroit. And would call me, what do you think we should do with this, Moore? And I said, what fights have you got on, online from? We're talking possibly Moore against Lennox Lewis. Well, he said, they offered me Foreman, but, he said, he's still a puncher. I said, well, let's see. So George was coming from the broadcast booth and walking across the arena. We were in Atlantic City at the convention center. And he was shambling along. The guy could hardly walk, bow-legged. And I said, oh, this guy looks awful. So I picked up the phone and said, Bill, you got to make that Foreman fight. The man fight, he can't even walk. You got to take it. Are you sure I said, I'm telling you. I got Foreman on the phone with him. And I said, George is Bill Kozerski's the promoter, Michael Moore. He said, really? Yeah, Don, give me the phone. I'll make that fight call. And there was an agent. He was married to Helen Reddy, who was the guy out in California. You would know him, Bob or Bill. And he was George Foreman, a very abrasive guy. He says, get on the phone with this guy. We'll make the fight. They made the fight. Foreman knocked him out in the 15th round. I haven't spoken to Bill Kozerski since, but George is very friendly with me.
When George did that, he broke all-time records.
Mm-hmm.
He knocked out Michael Moore to win 2 of the titles.
Mm-hmm.
And it was almost to the day 20 years that he had lost the title to Ali.
Wow.
20 years. I mean, it was like 3 days difference.
Mm-hmm.
20 years later.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that he did that no other fighter, at least in modern times, has ever done.
Anytime.
It was also one of my personally greatest nights in boxing. I almost got him disqualified because I was down in his corner, kneeling on the floor. And when Moore went down, I knew he wasn't going to get up. And I started up the stairs during the count.
Mm-hmm.
And probably the count was 3 or 4. Fortunately, two policemen were in the corner, and the uniformed cops, Vegas cops, and they grabbed me. Each one grabbed me by an arm, and they set me down on the concrete.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if I would have jumped in that ring like an idiot, I could have gotten him disqualified. And then when they said 10, it was Joe. Joe was the referee. And when he said 10, they actually picked me up. They said, now you can go up. And I did. So
is it true that he wore the same trunks from the fight in Zaire that night against Moore?
Yes, and I believe those trunks are in the Lyndon Johnson Library in Austin, Texas. There's a case that has George Foreman memorabilia in the Lyndon Johnson Library because George went into the Job Corps when Lyndon Johnson was president.
Mm-hmm.
So he was like LBJ's favorite.
Mm-hmm.
But that was so. And the other thing that George did, and Don, I know you're going to be able to correct me on this. He retired for 10 years after the Jimmy Young fight, and then he fought for Don Chargan and I in Sacramento.
Kozerski, remember that fight?
Zibikowski. Yeah, that's right. That's right. He worked for the Highway Department in Minnesota.
Okay.
A red-headed white kid, and George knocked him out in the 4th round. But he was retired for 10 years, almost to the day. And I'm the PR guy and kind of the promoter, along with Don and Lorraine Chargan. And I'm the ring announcer. And when I looked over in the corner and I'm announcing George Foreman, I swear to God, we had kept in close touch during those 10-year retirement. But as I was saying, and in this corner, the former gold medalist, former heavyweight champion, I got the strangest feeling like I was in the Twilight Zone. Oh my God, 10 years. And I'm actually introducing him in the ring.
Mhm.
And so, you know, many great memories of Foreman. And by the way, during his first career, when he was surly, you know, the surliness and the stare down and the intimidation
Liston, yeah.
that he learned from Liston, he was a nice kid.
Mhm.
He was a nice kid. I mean, I loved him then.
Mhm.
And I knew who the real George Foreman was.
Mhm.
And when he, after 10 years, when he came back, he would talk about cheeseburgers. How
Mhm.
many cheeseburgers? And he would have stories about cheeseburgers, this and cheeseburger that. So
Mhm.
a lawyer, entertainment lawyer from Los Angeles named Sam Perlmutter got a hold of me and got a hold of George and said, listen, let's capitalize on the cheeseburgers. And that's where the George Foreman grill came from.
Wow, fantastic.
George had stories about he used to ride through the drive-through line and order the biggest king size hamburger they had, and then after he ate it, he would circle around the restaurant and he would order. You know, you talk in the microphone thing.
Mhm.
He would order, but he would use a different voice because he didn't want them to know that this was his second time through. He got up to way over 300 pounds. I mean, you know, he was at least, I think he stopped weighing himself at 315, but he's one of a kind. And I used to say he was like a vintage car that you put on the blocks in your garage for 10 years. And then when you bring it out, you know, it's still a great car. And that's what happened to George.
Yeah, great fighter. Yeah. You know, it's interesting. You always compare. I'm talking about contemporary fights. Now, not so contemporary. For us, they are. Holmes against Foreman. And there's a guy, I've been trying to write a book, boxing, historical boxing abstract. Bill James wrote this on baseball. But he made the comparison, peak value and career value. So it's like the comparison. Who would you rather have? Sandy Koufax, great for 5 years, or Warren Spahn, great for 20 years? It's a different kind of a comparison. Some can be best at their peak and over a career. And if you compare the career value of Holmes, probably more successful, but at peak value, when Foreman was knocking out Joe Frazier and then Joe Roman and Ken Norton, that was as great a heavyweight ever. That's why I always would pick Foreman over Holmes, because he had that power. And I think they fought two at their very best. I think Foreman would have beaten Holmes, but I don't know. What do you guys think about that fight?
Where would you put Mike Tyson at his very best?
Way up there,
at
yes.
peak.
Yeah, better than Holyfield, better than Lennox Lewis, you know, maybe one of the greatest top 5 heavyweights, 100%. That people overlook it because Mike fought too long, like Roy Jones, that terrible end of his career when he lost to Kevin McBride, but sort of like Ezra Charles losing to Alfredo Zwane when he was 40. You got to throw that at his best. People are saying he was one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. No
But
about it.
But Don, how many fights did he get off the deck to win?
Well, under adversity, never had adversity.
Yeah.
Zero.
But yeah, right.
Never got off the deck. When he was knocked down, he was through. Okay. How many fights did he come from behind to win?
Well, that's because he was so good. He didn't have to come from behind.
Yeah.
That's pretty much
He was
like
just so dominant. Give me a pre-Razor Ruddock, Mike Tyson against almost anybody. Maybe not Ali at his peak. I'll still take Ali at his peak. You know, Liston at his peak, when Liston is just, because Liston's jab may have been, you know, the most destructive jab in history. You know, there's certain guys that would he match up well against? Tough to say. But Mike pre-Razor Ruddock, Mike in his prime, was just so destructive. And like I said, there was no adversity.
That's the problem.
Most of the guys were beat before he stepped in the ring.
He had all the great tools, but there's one thing that he lacked. And that was character. And I'm pointing to my heart now. He didn't have the character to put him at the top of the list. All the tools, fantastic tools, did not have the character to walk through fire and get up off the deck and come from behind and win.
Yeah. No, there's no.
That's what he lacked.
Yeah, but when he was
to me, it's like Foreman. I'm going to go to Foreman again. Foreman and Ron Lyle, to me, was maybe the greatest heavyweight fight I've ever seen. They had each other up and down, big punchers like Otis elevators going up and down, and it was an amazing fight, and George won. But
Is
yes,
is George Foreman sponsoring these WBC talks?
Yes. Bill's gonna have a new contract. He's gonna
He's
sell
my,
vacuum cleaners after this fight. Yeah.
yeah, as a matter of fact,
COVID
I have to
virus,
start
yeah.
talking about Oscar De La Hoya a little more.
Yeah. By the way, for those people who haven't seen Foreman Lyle,
Oh yeah.
please get
And
on the
you can
internet
see,
and watch.
you can
It is
see
one of the-
Bill Kaplan in the ring at the end, very young, very with his notebook.
Mhm.
Oh, you got-
I was yelling, I was yelling, George Foreman, Heart of a Lion, George Foreman, Heart of a Lion. And it was picked up on TV. Cosell was the man. And then George had T-shirts printed up and it showed a big lion and it would say George Foreman, Heart of a Lion. Yeah.
That's
No,
one
that
of the
was a
greatest.
super thrill.
I just watched it in YouTube a couple days ago. Unbelievable, 5 rounds of unbelievable.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. You
One
know,
of the rounds was short.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
oh,
one
that's
round's a
right.
short.
A minute short. That's right.
Was it you?
Cosell's-
You went
Yeah,
and rang the
Cosell's call
bell?
is priceless.
The timekeeper was so excited that he rang the bell after 2 minutes. You're right. Very good, Mauricio.
You know, there's a
That
saying
was
about you can have a good event after you can have a bad event after a good event and sell tickets, but you can't have a good event after a bad event. And I was working on a show with Larry Holmes and Joe Goulston. He was fighting at Hometown in Eastern Pennsylvania. And Don King, again, we were feuding, and I got him with Richard Jaquette promoted the bout. So we were selling tickets, 300-400 tickets. You know, it was going slow because Holmes is a big favorite, even though it's hometown. And that fight came on a Saturday on Y World of Sports. Jerry Parencio, I think, promoted the card. And after that fight, we sold 4,000 tickets the next day. Everybody wants to see a boxing match. Our fight was lousy. Had our fight been televised, Foreman and Lyle might not have sold tickets. But I'll tell you, so 4,000, everybody was talking boxing. It really shows how the residual effect a great fight can have on people.
Don, you told me that Foreman Lyle was the first ever event where Las Vegas became the host.
Yeah, well, Las Vegas had done a number of fights before. I mean, starting out with Archie Moore, Nino Valdez, and then they had, the Liston and Patterson rematch. But it's the first time where the casino actually sponsored the event and at their arena, where they paid a site fee, because you would have the fights. Remember all the great fights before were at the convention center, or Bill Miller had shows at the Silver Slipper, the smaller cards. But a casino never came out with this idea of, in quotes, the site fee, where we'll pay you, we'll give you the rooms. That's changed the whole entire industry. Jerry Parencio is one of the most overlooked figures in the history of boxing, but he actually found the financing for the first Ali Frazier fight, which took place in Madison Square Garden.
That's right.
The concept. And as well, Caesars, ironically, they sponsored the fight, the rematch with Foreman and Ali, which was in the Nassau Coliseum, which I'm sure you worked, Bill. And Don Chargan was the putative promoter along for Parencio.
Yeah, I actually made the match.
Oh,
I actually made the match.
Mm-hmm.
I went to Houston and because everybody wanted the fight. I mean, everybody wanted that rematch.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to Houston and I hung around, George outside George's door for long enough where he signed the contract. Then I went up to Philadelphia and signed and showed Frazier and his lawyer. George signed and I signed Frazier. And what happened? Frazier, an all-time great heavyweight. And George, it's all about styles, knocked him out twice, but I mean devastating knockouts.
Yeah.
Once in the second round and once in Nassau in the fourth round. So I actually worked for Parencio.
Yeah, I remember that was going to be in Yankee Stadium at one point. They couldn't make a deal with George Steinbrenner. He had just bought the Yankees, and it was 76, I believe, right? And then they went to Nassau Coliseum instead. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember watching the fight when
because the rival promoters got to Steinbrenner and kept us out, and they said, the people who rented and ran, 2 lawyers who ran, the operations at Yankee Stadium, they came to our press conference in New York and said, put it in Yankee Stadium. So they took Jerry Parencio and I out to Yankee Stadium. It was cold and snowy and everything. And the fight was planned for June. And they took us out there and they showed us where they would put the ring and the whole thing. And then when Parencio tried to sign up, he had been sabotaged by Bob Arum and Don King, who both wanted that fight and got to Steinbrenner. And then it was so funny. There was a verbal battle in the papers between Steinbrenner and Perenchio. And we wound up at the Nassau Coliseum.
Well, I'll tell you interesting. Here's and I remember Aram and the Garden ended up doing Allie Norton at Yankee Stadium in September of '76. So they blocked it. Mike Burke had been the president of the Yankees, and then interesting, coincidentally became president of Madison Square Garden. So he used a lot of leverage to keep you guys.
That's
out.
right.
They folded. They came in with Allie Norton, which was a disaster because there's a police strike. So it was the same year. Quite interesting how that all evolved. Yeah.
You know, again, getting back, you're absolutely right. And getting back to styles, I mean, you had Ali and Foreman and Norton and Fraser, and they did round robins on each other. You know, it teaches you the lesson about styles mean everything. Kenny Norton fought Ali 3 times, broke his jaw in the San Diego fight, and won that decision. And in the other 2 fights, one at the Forum in Los Angeles and one at Yankee Stadium, you could have raised Norton's hand. They were close. And yet George destroyed Norton, almost knocked him out in the first round, and did clock him in the second round in Caracas. We were, you know,
I was there.
and Ковsell was there, our guy Kovsell. I'm sure we have a lot of Kovsell stories. We could do an hour on Kovsell stories.
Oh, believe me. How many times I worked with him?
I have a question. How is the history on promoters? Why is Jerry Perenchio rarely mentioned in the you know, outside the experts? How do you get? Is it because you write your own story? Is it because Don King and Bob Arum took over that era and they wrote that story of boxing?
Well, you know, Jerry Perenchio, he didn't really, he promoted these events, you know, he ended up taking over Univision there. And I guess Bill would know better than I was in show business, but he really only put together the Ali Frazier. He got Jack Kent Cooke to put up the money for that fight in 1971. And then he got involved with the Foreman situation because he had a connection, I guess, with Cliff Perlman at Caesar's Palace through the entertainment business. He did the Foreman fight, but he didn't really get active subsequent to that. He didn't want to become a boxing promoter. He was more or less what we call an events promoter who indirectly got involved with boxing.
Jerry Perenchio wound up a billionaire. Everything he touched turned to gold. He started as a Hollywood agent, and he had some of the biggest stars in his agency, his own agency, and then he became president of the company that owned All in the Family and the Red Fox show. What's his name? Sanford and Son. I think they had like six of the top 10 rated shows. Tandem Promotions, I believe it was called, and he was the president of that. And then he owned Univision. He bought Univision. He everything he touched turned to gold. He wound up a billionaire. But he was in boxing, maybe for 2 years, off and on. And he was an amazing, amazing guy. I worked for him for about 1.5 years.
Yeah. And as I said, he wasn't a true boxing guy. He got in and out as an event guy. He was there because the big event was available. So he'd go in and he was able to do it.
He also promoted the Battle of the Sexes, which was the most watched.
Bobby Riggs, yeah.
Bobby Riggs,
That's and Billie Jean King. It was the most watched tennis game of all time. And it was just, you know, it wasn't Wimbledon. It wasn't the US Open. It was the Battle of the Sexes. That was his promotion. Hey, we were going to talk about trainers.
Okay.
Victor, you want to get to the trainers, or is it too soon?
I haven't talked for an hour. It's good. I don't have to ask anything. You just go and go. It's amazing. It's incredible. I just want to say hi to the people that is watching. There's people watching us from USA, Mexico, Thailand, Brazil, Panama, UK, Germany, Argentina. And I want to say hi to Len Coivicido, Javier Cubedo, Patrick Schmidt, Nancy, Kevin Noon, Frank Garza, Michael Niquaye, Jose Luis Camarillo. There's a lot of people watching, and I don't want to interrupt. I mean, you can go ahead. If you want to talk about, it would be interesting how was this show. In the beginning, it was the Madison Square Garden. They have their own matchmaker, and they bring the fighters. And now it's different. Now it's the matchmaker who sells. I mean, the promoter who sells the fight or the event to the TV, and then he hire or rent a venue. How was this evolving?
Well, look, I just want a quick story on Ali Frazier, you know, the evolution of that, because I know we're doing the 50th anniversary next year. So, you know, when they came back, when Ali finally got the comeback, and he was still under the cloud of possibly going to prison, he was appealing to the Supreme Court. He came back in 70. Well, Frazier beat Ellis to unify the title in February of 70. Ali comes back and beats Quarry in October. Frazier knocks out Bob Force in November. Ali comes back and wins over Bonavena in the Garden in December 7th, 1970. So everybody in the world wants this fight, and Ali couldn't leave the country. Everybody wanted it. The Garden had the connection with Frazier. Ali had fought there. Parenchio came out of left field. He got Jack Ken Cook to put up $4.5 million and $500,000 from the Garden. So he made this unprecedented guarantee of $2.5 million apiece. No one in those days, you would fight on a percentage. The champ generally got 40%, the challenger 20%, vacant title 30% apiece. And I remember very clearly Teddy Brenner. He was old school. He said, "I'll guarantee the Garden will guarantee him $1 million apiece against 30% of the gross." That's how you work boxing, man. You know, at the Olympic, they always did 15% of the gross, depending on who you were. Having said that, so now Parenchio comes at this phenomenal $2.5 million guarantee. I think the largest guarantee now was $500,000 to Gene Tunney when he fought Tommy Heaney in 1928, and they lost money. So just blew everybody away. They signed for the fight. Afterwards, biggest grossing fight of all time at that point, $20 million. And I remember Brenner saying, you know, if they took my deal, they would have got $6 million apiece. So as a result, after the fight, Frazier won. They could never make the rematch until both had lost because they both demanded $6 million guarantees, couldn't get it. But phenomenally, John King comes around 4 years later and gives them $5 million apiece for Foreman to fight Ali and Zaire. So it just showed a crazy time that was. But
Don, I have to correct you on that.
Mhm.
Look, with all respect, when it comes to history,
No, you
know 1,000 times more than I do. But Don King did not make the Rumble in the Jungle.
Right.
It was made by Hank Schwartz and
Right.
Barry
Video
Bernstein.
technique. Right. And the guy
They
named
made
Alex Sanchez or something like that.
Video Techniques.
Yeah.
Yeah, Video Techniques was their company.
Right.
And I worked for them because
I
they
did
had
too.
George Foreman.
Right.
And so one day they told me, we're going to hire Don King.
Mhm.
And I says, you mean the guy from Ohio that's a fight manager?
Mhm.
We're going to hire him because the fight's going to be in Africa and we need a black presence.
Mhm.
So Don was the second vice president.
Mhm.
Barry Bernstein was the president. Hank Schwartz was the executive. And Don was the second vice president. But just to show you how strong King is when it comes to changing history, everybody thinks that he made that fight.
Yeah.
It was done. It was a done deal.
Mhm.
What he did, and you know, I was there for 2 months with George and Ali.
Yeah, I remember, sure.
But Don has the credit for making that historic fight. He didn't do it. He was hired on after everything was done.
Mhm. 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 There's two
I
names
think
for him.
that's
Bernstein.
But he was, I'm sorry, but he was the face,
Mhm.
and he made it go globally.
Mm.
True.
And he
That's
made
true.
he made sure that carried on. I mean, I understand what you say, but I would give a lot of credit to Don King.
No, I'm not taking credit away, but he was hired on,
Yeah.
and he ate up Barry Bernstein and Hank Schwartz, chewed them up, spit them out, and left them in the dust. And even great historians like Majeski thinks that it was a Don King fight.
I remember working for them, 110 110 East 55th Street. There was their office. Barry Bernstein came out of the closed circuit era with Patterson and Johansson, and Hank Schwartz was an elected.
That's right.
He's still alive. Hank was into his 90s. Barry was a big
Really?
guy, yes. Well, I'll tell you, it's sort of analogous. We just talked about Ali Frazier. Parenchio put the deal together, but the guy who financed it was Jack Ken Cook, who owned the
That's
floor
right.
and owned the King. So he doesn't get the credit there, but he was the guy who wrote the check out for the $4.5 or $5 million that paid them. Yeah.
Parenchio came up with a million plus
Mhm.
of his money to get the thing started and then sold the rest of that to Cook.
Mhm.
It's true.
Mhm. Mhm.
I think Cook at that time wasn't he the owner of the Redskins?
Yes,
He had
that's
moved-
right. Washington Redskins, and then he ended up having
Yeah.
the Forum and everything else. Yeah, so he found the right guy to
The Forum was the house that Jack built because
do it. Mhm.
because he had the Lakers and the Kings,
Mhm.
and they both played at the Forum.
Yes, yeah, yeah. He was from Vancouver originally, like Eileen Eaton.
That's right. That's right. Like Eileen Eaton was from Vancouver. Most people don't know that. She was
And she was Jewish. Yes.
Who was the referee?
amazing woman. This little redheaded woman. She got the job because the Olympic Auditorium was owned by the LA Athletic Club, and she worked at the athletic club. I think she was a bookkeeper and an accountant. She had her 2 sons, and she was a single mother at the time. And there were fights at the Olympic, and the board said, we think they're stealing from us over there, and you go over there and check out their books. And Eileen went over there, and after a very short time, she says, you were right, they are stealing. They're not reporting what the sales are. And so they said, well, Eileen, we're going to make you the promoter. And here this bookkeeper had no experience in boxing or wrestling or roller games, became a legendary promoter. And this little redheaded lady, everybody was scared to death of her, including me.
The Dragon Queen. I remember.
Dragon, yep.
But she was that's how she became a promoter. And those were the salad days of the Olympic Auditorium, the 40 years that she was there.
Yeah.
Who was
Mauricio,
the
we're-
referee in the Jack Johnson Jeffries fight?
Was that Hugh McIntosh?
The promoter was Tex Rickard, was the Johnson Jeffries fight.
Yeah, who was the ref? Do you say referee or promoter?
Tex Rickard was the referee. McIntosh refereed the Burns Johnson in Australia.
Burns Johnson, I'm sorry.
So the referee,
Yeah.
he ended up being the promoter was the referee, right?
Promoter was the referee. That happened a number of times. Yes. And amazing. They didn't trust anybody else. If he got money on the line, you can referee the fight. You know, there's a fighter, Jim Jeffries, who gets really short shrift historically. He was one of the greatest heavyweights. We talk about Foreman. He was undefeated against every heavyweight of his era. Peter Jackson, although past his prime, he knocked out Bob Fitzsimmons. He knocked out Jim Corbett. He beat Tom Sharkey. Undefeated. He retires. 7.5 years later, comes back to fight Johnson, which was very similar to Ali getting knocked out by Holmes, or Holmes getting stopped by Tyson. But Jeffries, because of this one loss, is completely dismissed. It's sort of like it's a perception that white fighters couldn't fight. But in those days, white fighters made up 99% of the boxers, and they were great fighters. And up until the 50s, Jeffries was considered the greatest heavyweight of all time by virtually every expert of the day. Better than Dempsey, better than Tunney, and some even better than Joe Louis. He's been completely obliterated, and he really shouldn't, for one loss that came far after his career was over against one of the greatest heavyweights of all time.
But Don, isn't it true
I'm sorry,
that
that's so intriguing.
Yes, and he was a big heavyweight. He was like 6'2", 220. He was a heavyweight, could have fought in today. A big man.
Yeah. He was a physical freak for the time.
In the 50s, experts had him as the greatest.
Yes, absolutely.
And now he has disappeared from all lists.
Absolutely amazing. I put him in the top 10, but almost nobody. Again, Bob was saying, if you're going to rate fights based on their dominance, well, up till he retired in 1905, he was the first undefeated heavyweight champ to retire. Plus, he beat every top, really modern heavyweight, where he fought guys on a regular basis and beat every top contender. Twice Fitzsimmons, twice Corbett. He fought the rematch and beat Sharkey. He had fought a draw coming up with Gus Rule. He fought a rematch and knocked him out. He beat everybody. He basically retired. Jack Johnson was the top contender in 1905. And there was a lot of talk about Johnson fighting Jeffries. And of course, with the racism then, it was difficult. Although Jeffries fought 2 black fighters before being champ. And when Johnson lost a fighter named Marvin Hart, this sort of gave Jeffries the excuse to say, I don't have to fight because nobody wants to buy me in Hart. There's no clamor now for Johnson. And then Johnson came into his own after Jeffries retired. And by 1910, Jeffries was in no condition. But for whatever reason, he's totally obliterated today. And if you take out the Johnson loss, he was undefeated against the best heavyweights of his generation. And again, Fleischer rated number 2 behind Johnson as a fellow Charlie Rose, who was a manager in those days, rated number 1. He had an incredible reputation up until, you know, the 60s changed a lot. And I think they confused him with these white hopes like 𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪 and, you know, inferior heavyweights, but he wasn't. He wasn't in that class. He wasn't in a class with Jess Willard. He was a bona fide item, and he does get, unfortunately, gets overlooked today, and he was a great fighter.
Trainers.
Okay, we've gone on after 20 minutes. Go ahead.
Not that I want to, but there's a difference between a trainer that's a teacher and a trainer that's a great corner man.
Mm-hmm.
And a great corner man does all the obvious things in the corner between rounds.
Mm-hmm.
But I think being a motivator is so important. That's just my personal thing.
Mm-hmm.
The greatest motivator I ever saw was Angelo Dundee,
Mm-hmm.
that I ever saw.
Mm-hmm.
He saved Leonard in the Hearns fight.
Mm-hmm.
He saved Ali in the what's the Englishman, Henry Cooper, in that fight.
Yeah.
And he would and he saved Ali in the first Liston fight.
Mm-hmm.
He was a great cornerman.
Mm-hmm.
As a teacher, I'm told that he wasn't the greatest, but as a cornerman, he
Mm-hmm.
was great. Now I'm going to give you kind of a Dundee type cornerman who probably nobody else would but me would say this name, Joe Goosen. Joe Goosen is a great cornerman, a great motivator. And then you have all the obvious, the Gil Clancy, Eddie Reynoso is starting to earn the reputation of a great cornerman because what he's done, you know, with Canelo and what he's doing with Ryan Garcia and Lou Duva and Eddie, help me.
Eddie Futch.
Eddie Futch, Manny Stewart, great cornerman, great teacher, and Berenstein, and there was some great Mexican trainers, and I can't remember their names.
Cuyo Hernandez.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Cuyo.
Don Cuyo, that's right.
And
Or as
I'll tell you, as far as teachers, give me some of the old. Give me a Ray Arcel.
right,
Give me a Freddie Brown. Give me a Georgie Benton.
right,
Whitey Bimstein.
that's right.
You know, back in the day, these guys were true teachers.
Yeah.
I mean, they taught you from square. For me, the sign of a great trainer are the guys that bring you from square zero to the title or get you as good as you can be. They're not the guys who take established fighters and tweak them and, you know, they're established. They take either undeveloped or lesser developed fighters.
Jackie
And they bring
McCoy.
Mhm.
Jackie McCoy mentioned
Jackie
earlier,
McCoy.
developed 5 world champions. He
Mhm.
also was a good manager for that, very good manager, but he was a hell of a trainer, hell of a teacher.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yep.
Goldman was a great trainer. You know, took Marciano from nothing.
Charlie Goldman, sure. Customato.
Yeah. Yes. Brilliant trainer. Yeah. Crazy,
Yeah.
but brilliant. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. As loony as they come, but you know, going all the way back, Jack Blackburn,
Yes.
great fighter turned into a great trainer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, Joe Louis and those guys.
Come on, how many cats do you have?
Me.
Are you talking about cut men now?
My cats? So we're talking about my cats.
Meow, meow, your cats.
I have no cats, no animals, no
more.
There are no quadrupeds living in my household.
To round up this WBC talks, can you tell us a story on how you got so many cats one day?
Is this relevant to boxing? But okay, yes. So one day I'm living in a house and I had been by myself. We had some problems with my family, my wife, and a cat comes by, and it was a bottom floor in a little condominium we had. And so I hear this cat, and I've always been an animal lover. You know, I was going to be a zoologist before I got into this insanity. So anyway, so the cat, all right, comes in. It's a little piebald cat. It comes in, and I give it a little piece, a container of milk. Goes out again. Next night, I hear it again, comes in again. So now this cat is coming regularly. I said, well, I don't have any food for it. I'll open a can of tuna fish. It eats the tuna fish and gets the milk. So now I don't see it for a few days, and it comes back again. And I said, well, I better buy some cat food because this is now a semi-regular cat. So I feed it some cat food. And then meanwhile, it comes into the house one day, and I put out some food for it, and it sort of disappears. I don't know where the cat is. Maybe the cat died. I'm looking around the house, don't see it. So I had to go away for a weekend. They come back, and I look around, and I hear like little peeping sounds. I said, oh, a bird got into this house. Must have a bird egg that hatched. I can't imagine this. They peep, 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 peep. I open the closet. There's a cat with 6 kittens. I said, oh my God, this cat came to the house, had 6 cats. Well, I said, I got to get them, adopt them. So I called the SPCA, and they say to me, well, you have to have them weaned. We won't take kittens. They're not weaned. Otherwise, you can, you'll have to destroy them. So no, I don't want that. So we wait 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks. Now the cats are basically running all over the place. And I take them, they said, nobody wants them. I said, well, what would you do? Well, we'll have to put them, we'll have to put them to sleep, which is a euphemism to kill them. Oh, I wouldn't want that. I bring the cats back. Well, in 4 weeks, the cats are having more cats, and those cats. So I ended up with 20 cats. And I finally decided to get them fixed because the veterinarian said, every one of these cats is gravid. Everyone's going to have kittens of their own. You'll have 100 cats. So after the cats, I finally got them fixed. I said, I'll find owners for them. I'll get rid of these cats. I'm done. I moved to a house about a mile away. I said, done with these cats. And one day I hear beep, 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 beep. I swear to God, I have 15 cats standing outside of my front door. I said, my God, how could you find me? The cats can, well, they all died off eventually. That's the cat story, yes.
You moved out, but you didn't sell the house. You left the house for the
I
cats.
left the house. I left the cats in the house, and the cats followed me to the new house. God knows what happened. But finally, it cost me $2,000 to get them all fixed.
Oh my,
Let them live off their lifestyle. Because they say nobody wants cats. People adopt dogs, but nobody wants cats. That's why I see so many cats running around the neighborhood. So thank God it wasn't elephants. I've been in a bad state today, I'll tell you that.
Mauricio. Oh, Mauricio. Can't we go another 1 or 2 more hours?
Yes, please.
No problem.
Listening to me, people will abandon a house and suffer the coronavirus. 50-year-old stories.
Maybe we'll come back. Maybe Mauricio, maybe we can fight a rematch in a month or so because about stories. Stories like Don just told, only stories related to fighters and trainers and promoters.
Yeah, let's schedule another round with this panel has been wonderful, and just to hear your voices, see your faces is refreshing and highly entertaining and knowledge feeding to one. So I just want to say this has been very special. Thank you so very much. Stay home, stay safe. God bless you. And we will come back soon. We will come back very strong. And boxers are eager to go and demonstrate their power in the ring. And I'm sure it will happen sooner than we believe.
Thank you.
Mauricio, can I say one thing?
Thank you, everybody.
No, Bob, don't go away. And
Okay.
Don, don't go away. And because I'm the oldest, I'm going to be presumptuous and speak for all of us. We are so proud of the way you are operating the World Boxing Council. We're so proud of you. You're standing on your great father's shoulders. He's looking down from heaven and smiling. Thank you, Mauricio. Thank you for everything you do for boxing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
All the best.
Yes, stay safe.
I just
God
want to
bless.
thank all of you.
Thank you,
It was
too.
great. I was just quiet hearing all the stories. And let me tell the people that when I go to New York and have dinner with Don, this is the kind of talks that we have. Or when I'm in LA with Bill, this is the same kind of talks that we learn a lot from you. Both in conventions, we spend a lot of time together learning from you. Thank you very much. I really love to be in touch with you. And let's do one more round again some other time.
Thank you,
Anytime.
Victor. Thank you, Victor, for being the matchmaker.
That's
We appreciate it.
you for being my family. Thank you.
Tomorrow we have a very good panel. We're going to have wives of boxers in Spanish and English. In the English panel, we're going to have Lonnie Ali and Kelly Swift, wife of Deontay Wilder. And it's going to be very interesting. In the morning, we're going to have Chavez, Barrera, Morales, Arce wives. It's going to be the power of woman. So we invite you to tune in tomorrow. And remember, you can control what goes into your head. Stay positive. God bless. Take care. Thank you so much.
Thank you very
Take care,
much.
Mauricio.
This was round 14, WBC Talks. Stay home, stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you, Mauricio.
Thank you.
Bob, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.